to your childhood for a second. While other kids were, crying over scraped knees or stressing out about what game to play at recess, were you sitting in the living room just holding your breath? Maybe you were listening to your parents' footsteps, trying to read their mood, or stepping in to cook dinner for a younger sibling because an adult in your house was completely overwhelmed. You weren't just a kid. Actually, scratch that. You weren't really a kid at all. You were the peacemaker, the protector, and honestly, the tiny therapist in your own home. You grew up way too fast. In this explainer, we're going to explore the psychology behind this exact experience, and more importantly, dive into the practical steps for healing, including mourning that lost childhood, learning to receive help, and a really powerful technique called the 15-minute rule. So let me ask you a highly relatable question. Would you rather struggle completely alone than ask someone for help? Think about it. Are you the kind of person who will stubbornly carry 4 insanely heavy grocery bags all the way up to a 5th-floor apartment, your hands literally shaking in pain, and when a neighbor asks if you need a hand, you instantly reply, "Oh no, I'm fine, I've got it." If that hits a nerve, you are absolutely not alone. And as we're going to see, that deeply ingrained instinct didn't just come from nowhere. Okay, let's dive into this. In family psychology, there's a specific term for having to grow up too early: parentification. It essentially means you were handed a massive, heavy backpack of adult responsibilities when you were just a little kid. Psychologists generally divide this into 2 types. The first is instrumental parentification. This is when you had to cook, clean, or literally raise your siblings. It's exhausting for sure, but often a bit less damaging if the parents still acknowledge and validate your effort. But the second type? That one is far more dangerous. It's called emotional parentification. This is when you become your parents' emotional dumping ground. You act as their confidant, comforting them about money stress, or maybe they're acting as a referee in their divorce. When a 7-year-old has to comfort a 35-year-old, generational boundaries completely collapse. The child learns a brutal, lasting lesson: my needs do not matter. Which brings us directly to a concept known as hyperindependence. Society loves to look at highly independent people and shower them with praise, right? Wow, you're so mature, or you're such an old soul. But the reality? Hyperindependence is very often a trauma scar masking as this superhero-level strength. When you were little, asking for help probably resulted in being ignored, criticized, or just treated like a burden. So your brain built a massive fortress to protect against that childhood disappointment. You basically decided, fine, I'll just do everything alone. But human beings are social creatures. Operating this way long-term ultimately leads to deep self-isolation and just massive, crushing burnout. To maintain that fortress, your brain developed a very specific and incredibly exhausting skill: emotional radar scanning. Because your childhood environment required you to always know exactly what mood your parents were in, your amygdala, the fear center of your brain, well, it started working overtime. You learned to read a room in 2 seconds flat. Even today, you can hear a door slam, a heavy sigh, or just tense footsteps, and your nervous system automatically tightens up. You're basically in a permanent state of fight or flight, constantly scanning the environment just to keep yourself safe. Now, what's really interesting about this is that it creates a deeply painful paradox. You probably crave peace. You absolutely hate noise and chaos. But when things are actually quiet, you start to feel restless and anxious. Why is that? Well, it's because, to your nervous system, peace actually feels like danger. In your past, silence was usually just the calm before the storm. So when there's no crisis, your brain kind of creates one through anxiety, pushing your cortisol levels back up to what feels normal and familiar. Crazy as it sounds, you actually feel safer when you're worried than you do when you're relaxed. Because your nervous system is stuck in this hypervigilant loop, you're robbed of one of the greatest human experiences: flow. This was defined by Professor Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi as the state of being so completely absorbed in an activity that you lose track of time, forget yourself, and just feel pure joy. Think of a kid building a sandcastle, totally lost in the moment. But for a hyper-independent adult whose brain is always scanning for threats, flow is basically a forbidden luxury. You just can't sink into pure joy because your mind never truly feels safe enough to let its guard down. You essentially become a security guard who never, ever gets to clock out. This beautifully and tragically explains why you probably can't even relax on vacation. Even when you're supposed to be playing and having fun, you are busy managing your play. You're checking off itineraries, making sure everyone else is having a good time, taking the perfect photos. You aren't actually experiencing the moment at all. You're policing it, waiting for something to go wrong. This creates a profound internal split within you. On one hand, you have the false adult facing the world, highly empathetic, incredibly productive, operating by a strict code of adulthood just to survive socializing and working.
But beneath all that, you have the trapped inner child. They're curled up in the subconscious, absolutely terrified that the world is unsafe for play. And because you can't connect with your own joy, you connect with other people's pain. You become the ultimate therapist friend. You naturally attract wounded people because fixing them makes you feel useful. You will happily spend 3 hours listening to a friend cry, but when you hurt, you hide in the bathroom with the shower running so no one hears your pain.
So we've spent time really understanding the wound, but let's pivot strongly into the solution. Let's move to and see how this builds into 3 incredibly practical steps to finally break the cycle of hyper-independence. And spoiler alert, the solution isn't about trying harder. It's actually about learning how to try less.
Step 1. Mourn the past.
It might sound dramatic, but you are carrying a very real, very heavy sadness. You really need to validate the grief for that 8 or 10-year-old version of you who deserved to just be a little messy. You deserved to make mistakes, to be irresponsible sometimes, and to know that the adults had things handled so you could just be a kid. You have to let your inner child quit the job. You don't have to be falsely grateful for growing up too fast. You don't have to look back and say, well, I guess it made me strong. It is totally okay to admit that it wasn't fair. The next time you catch yourself tensing up, rushing to fix someone else's problem, I want you to pause. Let things stay a little messy. Give that overworked inner child permission to finally clock out. Moving on to step 2, learn to receive. So the crucial point here is that this is arguably the absolute hardest part of the process, learning to be a beginner at receiving. People who grow up too fast are basically like an ambulance with its siren always blaring, rushing around to save others, but never pulling over for basic maintenance. You have to learn how to let others show up for you. You have to unlearn the deeply toxic belief that I only have value when I'm useful. Listen to me, you are not a problem-solving machine. Your existence alone has value. To put this into practice, try these small daily exercises. When someone asks to help you with those heavy grocery bags, force yourself to pause for 3 seconds. Literally count to 3. Stop that automatic, I'm fine, from escaping your mouth. Swallow your pride and practice just saying, yes, that would really help. And finally, step 3, the 15-minute rule. And this brilliantly illustrates our final practical step. This is about giving yourself daily, structured permission to let go of that suffocating code of adulthood. It's about intentionally showing your nervous system that the world literally will not end if you stop managing it. Give yourself 15 minutes every single day to do something completely, wonderfully pointless, something your 5-year-old self would absolutely love. Scribble violently on a piece of paper. Play a completely ridiculous game on your phone, or just lie flat on the floor and stare at the ceiling. When the guilt creeps in, and oh, it for sure will, just smile at it. Remind yourself that you are actively retraining your brain to understand that the world remains perfectly okay even when you aren't controlling every single detail of it. I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. What would actually happen if you finally put the heavy backpack down? You did an absolutely incredible job holding everything together for decades. You survived, but you're exhausted. It is time to take off the armor of the perfect adult. Embrace making mistakes. Allow yourself to be a little lazy. Stop trying to parent the entire world and let your inner child finally get some much-needed rest. What incredible things could you discover about yourself if you simply allowed yourself to be supported? Thank you for exploring this explainer. Think back